Okay, we begin chapter 2. So, in chapter 1, we essentially discussed two things. One, we're going to kind of put on the shelf right now and get back to in later chapters. And the second thing is what we're going to be focusing on in the next few chapters. The first thing we discussed after the Alter Rebbe quoted a bunch of sources and asked a bunch of questions, right? He asked a bunch of questions about balancing joy and sadness, right? Balancing between feeling bad about your sin versus not feeling depressed and feeling like a loser, right? After all that kind of questions, there's two things we really learned. Number one is the definition of the Beinoni and the Tzaddik. The Tzaddik is somebody who has no Yetzer Hara, no struggles. And the Beinoni is somebody who has the Yetzer Hara but controls himself. And that discussion, the Beinoni versus the Tzaddik, is going to come up again in chapters 10, 11, 12, and then going forward. The second thing we discussed is this idea that every Jew doesn't have one soul, but two souls. And a soul, as we said, it's a neshama, but it comes into the body, it's a nefesh. A nefesh, as we explained, is my experience of myself, the way I feel myself. I feel alive. And there's two parts of me. There's one that's physical, or like you said, and the Alter Rebbe calls it, the animal soul. It's the part of me that's just a regular human being. And a regular human being is a biological creature like animals. Animals want to eat, sleep, and have children. And so do adults, so do humans eat, sleep, and have children. We're a little more sophisticated. We can't live in the woods. We need to live in houses. Oh, good morning. But essentially, we're just sophisticated animals. That's one soul, one experience of me. Another soul I have, another experience of me is the godly soul. There's a part of me that's not motivated by me, what do I want, what do I want? The part that's me, what do I want isn't bad necessarily, but it could be very bad, right? But the godly soul is motivated by not what do I want, but what does God want? So there's two me's, one that's fully selfish and one that's godly, one that's selfless. Clear? The next three chapters, 2, 3, 4, and 5, 4 chapters, is going to discuss what is this godly soul. So just to give you an outline. Chapter 2 is going to discuss what is the godly soul? What is it? Where does it come from? How is it godly? What is it? Chapter 3 is going to discuss how does the godly soul feel and how does the godly soul think. Chapter 4 is going to discuss how the godly soul does mitzvahs and what mitzvahs mean. And chapter 5 is going to discuss how the godly soul studies Torah and what the study of Torah means. And then chapter 6, 7, and 8, we're going to get back to the animal soul. Because so far, all we said about the animal soul is that it's selfish. It's a biological creature that just feels itself, and it could be bad and it could be good. That's all we said so far, right? We didn't say how it thinks, how it feels, what does it make me do. We didn't get into all of that yet. That's going to come in chapter 6, 7, and 8. But now we're going to discuss the godly soul. Okay? So Perek Beis, chapter 2. You have it? Page Vav or page 7, 6, and 7, looking at the numbers on the bottom. Yeah. You have it? Okay. Perek Beis, chapter 2. The Nefesh Hashenis B'Yisrael. The second soul that the Jew has, right? The first one is the one from Klippa, the one that's selfish. The second one is the godly. Why is it second, not first? When does it come to you? It starts right away, coming in a little bit. But when is it fully developed? At your bar mitzvah. Right? As soon as you're born, you're already a biological creature. Right? You already want to eat, sleep. And if you don't get what you want right away, what are you doing? You start to cry. Like a baby, right? Baby start out as selfish. The whole world revolves around itself. Change me, feed me, put me to sleep, right? Then as you get older, you start to realize the world doesn't revolve around me. Until finally hit bar mitzvah, and now you're expected to live not just selfish, but by the godly soul, which is not about me, but about what Hashem wants. So that's why it's the second soul. It's the second soul because it comes later in life. it comes right away. A Jew is a Jew, and a Jew has a soul even right from birth, a godly soul. But the godly soul is not so much in the body and in the mind until one gets to 13. Okay? So what is this soul? The first soul we said comes from Klippa, comes from the part of the world that's just selfish and biological. The godly soul is Chelek Elika Mimal Mamish. Remember these 4 words. Crucial words in our understanding of God, Torah, and the Jew. Chelek Elika Mimal Mamish. Literally a part of Hashem above. What is the neshama? When we say that a Jew has a neshama, this is what we mean. This is what people refer to. There's literally a part of Hashem inside of you. That's what you have to know. And the whole chapter is going to be to explain this. What does it mean you have a part of Hashem in you? So let's understand. So Kamosha Kosov, first he quotes a pasuk which proves this. The pasuk says, "Vayifach ba'apav nishmas chayim." You know this pasuk comes from? And he blew into his nose a soul of life. Bereshis Adam Rishon. So what does this pasuk prove? That's true, comes from Hashem, but let's think about this even more. How does the Torah describe creation? What? Say it again. What does Hashem do to create? He speaks. Vayomer Elokim, and God said. And here, what does it say? And he blew. What's the difference between blowing and talking? Talking also has air, right? If I don't have air, I don't talk. So what's the difference between blowing and talking? Yeah, 2 things. Number 1, when I speak, it's a very little air. It's not the air that I breathe. The air that I breathe, when I blow, I take a deep breath. So the air that I'm actually living on comes out. And that becomes the neshama. The very life of Hashem himself comes into the neshama. When I speak, what do you get? Do you get my breath? Hopefully not. What you're getting is the sound that my breath made. So it's removed from me. So that's when Hashem creates the world, of course there's godly energy in the world. Otherwise, how does it exist? But the godly energy in the world is like hidden inside of speech. Just like my breath is hidden inside of speech, and all you're getting is a speech, not my ear. So likewise, creation gets a low level of Hashem's energy that's compared to speech. And just like it doesn't take much of my breath to speak, it doesn't take much of Hashem's energy to create. But when I blow, what are you getting? My actual air. You're getting my actual life. And that's what goes into the neshama. The neshama is not made by Hashem. The whole world is made by Hashem. The neshama is from Hashem. Just like my mouth, just like my speech is created from my breath. But my blowing, that's my breath itself. That's my very life. Understand? So the godly energy, that's the neshama. The neshama is godly energy itself. The world is created by a small little amount of godly energy. Like my speech, which is created by a little bit of my air. But the blowing, that's the life I actually live on. The air that I actually breathe, I blow out. So the light, the godliness of Hashem himself, that's what goes and becomes the neshama. Clear? A little bit? It's a subtle idea, but I hope it's clear. Clear? All right. Now, how do we know that this talks about every Jew? This was about Adam Rishon, right? The pasuk only talked about Adam. So how do we know it's talking about every Jew? Because the pasuk says, we say every morning in our prayer, Elokai Hashem Shenatata bi, Ta'arahi, Ata Yatzarta, Ata Barata, Ata what? Ata Nafachta Bekirbi. Ata Nafachta bi, you blew it into me. So every morning we thank Hashem for the neshama that he blew into me. Which means the neshama that I have is the same way it was blown into Adam Rishon, blown into me too.
But this is everyone? Like
every Jew.
Even
Only a Jew. It's a good question, because Adam HaRishon was the original soul from which all other souls come, Jews and non-Jews. So he has the Jewish idea, but after Adam HaRishon, it didn't go to anybody except to the Jew. But Adam HaRishon was the first person, so he had all the souls that ever will come, including Jewish souls. So he had it. He said, Vayipach ba'apov, God blew into his nose. And then every Jew says, you Hashem blew it into me. So the table is created by Hashem. My body is created by Hashem, but my soul is a part of Hashem himself. Clear? Like the difference between my speech versus my blowing. My speech is something made by my breath. So it's separate from me. But the air that I blow, that is my very life. I'm blowing out my own life in air. Clear? Clear? Okay. And this he takes from the Zohar. Like the Zohar says, Man de nafach, one who blows, mitoicher nafach, he blows from the inside. You gotta really blow out the air you have. Hiroshis means mitoicher yusai umepnimi from the very inside of himself. The very inside of my life force is what I blow out when I blow very strongly. So likewise, when Hashem, obviously Hashem doesn't have a mouth, Hashem doesn't have air. It's all a mashal. You know what a mashal is?
It's an
example, a parable. But it's not actual air. But it's there to demonstrate to you what's going on. And in the same way, I know that when I blow, it's my very life that I'm blowing out. So likewise, when Hashem says that I blew an neshama into you, it means the very godliness itself is put into the neshama. As opposed to everything else in creation, where Hashem puts a little bit of energy to make speech, which makes man, which makes a table, or makes everything else in this world. Clear? Now the Alter Rebbe gives another example. So till now we're giving an example of air versus speech. But Jews are not just called, the neshama is called blowing, right? God's air, God's life, the godliness itself, not just something created by Hashem. But then there's another other thing. Jews are also called God's what? God's children. So there's God's creation, something God made, versus God's children. What's the difference between my relationship between something I make and my children?
They're the same.
My relationship to my children is the same thing as my relationship to something I make.
Chair.
I made a chair. My relationship to my chair is the same thing as I make to my children. No, me. I'm talking about me.
Oh.
So what's the difference between me and my children, my relationship to my children, versus my relationship to my chair? Of course, I love my chair. I made it very nicely. But of course, I love my children more. But why do I love my children more? Because they're an extension of me. My chair is something I made. What does it take to make a chair? My hands and a little bit of brains, a little bit of planning. Right? What does it take to make my children? I have to put my whole DNA into it. My essence, my DNA has to go into to make that child. It's an extension of me. This is true physically also of making a child. Not just like, theoretically, but to physically make a child, my DNA has to go there. So it's an extension of me. There's no my DNA is not in the chair I make. A little bit of my planning is in the chair I made. A little bit of my handiwork is in the chair I made. That's pretty much it. And I can walk away and the chair breaks. And if a chair breaks, I don't feel like I lost a part of me. I lost a little bit of energy. I lost a little bit of time because it broke. But chas v'shalom, if somebody, God forbid, hayaloisia, loses a child, they lost something they made. They lost themselves. There's a whole part of themselves that are cut off. Because a child is not just something you make. It's an extension of you. So when we say that Jews are the children of Hashem, that means a Jew is an extension of Hashem. Whereas Hashem made the whole world. Like I made a chair. Understand? Another mashal to explain the difference between the connection between a Jew and Hashem versus creation and Hashem. One example is speech versus blowing. Right? Both have air, but the air in speech is very little air, and it's only there to make speech, whereas blowing is my actual air that I'm blowing out. Another example is the difference between a child versus something I make. A child is an extension of me, and something I build is just something I built. Some things take more energy to build, some things take less energy to build, but it's all very external. It's very secondary to me. My child, it's an extension of me. Clear? So let's see how the Alter Rebbe explains that. Kachal derech mashal, so too as well. Neshama Yisrael, the soul of the Jewish people, alu b'machshava, go up into the deepest part of Hashem's thought, like a child that goes up to the deepest part of a father's thought. The Ksiv, like it says, V'ni b'chayra Yisrael, my children, the firstborn, Israel. The Jews are called God's firstborn. You are God's children. Perosh just means to say, just like a child comes from the deepest part of the father's mind. What he means here is the very essential DNA of the father. That's how we have to make a child. Physically and in the soul also. It's not just my physical DNA going into my son to make my son, but the DNA of my soul goes into my child's soul, which is why children look physically like their parents. And they also have a very similar disposition, right? You have a similar way of thinking, a similar way of feeling to your parents because you're an extension of them, right? So kach, so too, kiviyachol, so to speak. What are you going to say?
Is that the way Hashem, like, it passes down?
That's correct.
But through the mother.
Yeah, we're going to get to that. Where does the mother come into this picture? We'll get to that in a moment. It's going to be part of the example. But right now we're talking about the relationship between father and child. In order to get to the child, it has to go to the mother, right? The father has to give the seed to the mother, and then the mother has to develop it to make a child, right? So, sorry?
Yeah, it has to be, it can't be the father.
It has to have, yeah, so we're going to get to that in a moment. How the mother fits into this picture. Let's get into that in a minute. We're going to get to that next week. But first, let's understand the relationship between the father and the child, and then we'll see where the mother comes in here. Okay? Everybody with me, clear? Yep. So, Kachsa too, Kiviyachal, so to speak, Neshama is called Ish Yisrael, the Neshama of every single Jew, Nimshecha, comes down from the deepest part of Hashem's thought and Hashem's wisdom. The EU Chakim, God is wise, this is what the Zohar says, but not like our wisdom. Right? Hashem's wisdom is not like human wisdom, it's a whole other level of wisdom. And it's not just a whole other level of wisdom because Hashem is much smarter than us. But it's a whole other level of wisdom because Elahu v'chachmasai echad. God and His wisdom are one. What does that mean? Explain in a minute. Like the Rambam writes, Shahu Amada v'hu Yadeya. So let's think. I'm going to explain this a little bit. If you don't fully understand it, don't worry about it. You'll be able to understand the rest of the chapter even if you don't understand what I'm about to say. I'm just going to explain it because the Alter Rebbe talks about it here, and it's a very important thing to know. But again, if you don't fully understand it, don't worry about it. When you understand something, there are three parts to every time you understand something. There's you, there's your brains, and then there's a piece of information you know, or the piece of information you're learning. And those are three different things. Me, I use my mind, item number 2, to get the information in this book, item number 3. Following? Now, is there anything separate from Hashem? Chas v'sholom. Is anything separate from Hashem? Can't be. But when I know something, I change a little bit. Before, I had my mind, but I didn't have that information. Now that I use my mind to get that information, I changed a little bit. Now I have new information. Does God change? No. So He and His mind and everything He knows is all one. Not like me, where me, my mind, and the thing I know are three different things. But for Hashem, His mind, and the thing He knows is all one. Clear? Now, if you don't understand it, don't feel so bad, because the Rambam says like this. The Rambam says this. The Alter Rebbe is quoting him. The Dover said this idea, it's impossible for a person to fully understand this. It's impossible for us to understand what that means, that you and the information you know are one. It's not possible. You and your information are different. The information's out there in the books, and I got to go discover it using my mind. So we don't really understand what that means, that you're one with the ideas you understand. But for Hashem, that's the fact. Hashem and his mind and everything he knows is all one. Okay? So if you don't understand it, don't feel so bad. The Rambam says it's impossible to fully understand. But at least you should know that it's a truth, even if you don't understand it. Follow what I'm saying? If I'm not clear, please stop me so I can explain better. Yes? You understood? Sorry?
A little. That was understood.
Which is not understood?
What it is.
Yeah, it's impossible to imagine such a thing.
What?
That something is one with its mind and one with the information it gets. Right? It's impossible to imagine that because you, or me and you, in other words, when we think of let's say when you think of love, even if you're thinking about somebody else's love, what you're imagining is the way you feel love, right? You always imagine things the way you experience it. So when you're thinking of learning new ideas or getting new information, getting new knowledge, you think about it the way you experience it. And the way you experience it is that before you know the information, you didn't know it, and now you do know it because the information is separate from you, and you went to find out about it. So to think of Hashem's knowledge where he's not going anywhere to find anything, because there's no place where Hashem isn't. Hashem is everywhere. So the information he knows is already inside of him. We can say the words, but it's impossible to imagine that because we don't experience information like that. Follow what I just said? Okay. So if you didn't fully get it, it's okay. The point he's trying to make is that when we say that a Jew goes to the deepest place of Hashem's mind, it means it goes to the deepest place of Hashem himself. Because Hashem's mind and him are one. Hashem's wisdom and him are one. So if a Jew comes from the deepest place of Hashem's mind, that means he comes from the deepest place of Hashem himself. Understand? That's basically what he's trying to do here. Is that clear? Is that much clear? Okay. So he brings psukim to prove that Hashem's thoughts are not possible to understand. The pasuk says, you try to understand God, are you going to be able to find him? The pasuk says, God says, my thoughts are not like your thoughts. Okay. Now we get to something Aaron said about where the mother comes into the picture. So all Jews, we just said, are like a child to their father. In the same way, the essential, deepest part of my DNA is put into my children. Sorry, I blocked you. So too, the essential DNA of Hashem, godly DNA, that's the neshama. Right? Now here comes another question. If that's the case, how come some Jews are better than others? Not better, chas v'shalom. But how come, well, some are. Let's say Moshe Rabbeinu versus me. If my neshama also has that godly DNA, I'm a child of Hashem, so how come I'm on one level and Moshe Rabbeinu is another level?
They're all equal in Shabbat. It's just in how you act in this.
But it's not just how we act. Moshe Rabbeinu's neshama is a higher level.
Yeah, because
not just how he acted. He's
He
born with a higher neshama.
He earned it in this world.
There is something to be, you can earn it, but there are also levels of neshamas. Not just levels, different types. Some people do better with loving Hashem, and some people, the way they connect to Hashem is through fear. Some people through joy, and some people through seriousness. Neither of them are wrong. Right? There are different ways of connecting to Hashem. Why? Because they're different types of neshamas. But if we all come from one place, if we all have the same DNA from God, how come we're different levels and different types? That's what he's about to ask. And the answer to the question is what you said about the mother. Ready? Let's see. Third to last line on the bottom of the page there. Even though there are thousands of different levels of neshamas, one higher than the next, to no end. Kamai, for example, the great level of the neshama of the Avot, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, Moshe Rabbeinu, all of Hashem, and Moshe Rabbeinu, if you compare it to the souls of our generation, this is the Alter Rebbe talking 200 years ago. Imagine our generation is even lower. The ikvus of the Mashiach. We are on the heels of Mashiach. We're at the last generations before Mashiach is coming. You cannot compare our neshamas to the levels of neshamas of Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Moshe Rabbeinu, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, Abaye, Rava. The neshamas were like, ooh, and we're even the times of the Alter Rebbe. How much more so us? 200 years later. Shehem, which these neshamas of our generation, they're like a heel, like a foot. If you're going to compare it to a mind and a head. So first of all, every generation has different level of neshamas. And then even within each generation, you have leaders of the Jewish people, tzaddikim, their neshamas are like brains and minds and heads. Comparing it to the neshamas of all the random people, and the simple people. And likewise, compare each person, each soul to another soul. Because each neshama is comprised of different levels. And for you, you excel in your mind. This person excels in love of Hashem. This person excels in fear of Hashem. This in joy, this one in seriousness. Each neshama has a different personality and different level. So how is that possible? Nevertheless, the level of every neshama, whatever level it is, kulam, all of them, the highest level of neshama, Moshe Rabbeinu's neshama. Into the lowest level of neshama, which is put in beguf amei aretz v'kal shebakalim, which is in the body of the most simple person who is, the most misbehaving Jew. The most misbehaving Jew. And Moshe Rabbeinu, different level neshamas. But all of them, where's their source? Where do they start? What's their source? Their spiritual source? From where? From Hashem himself. From God's divine mind. Shehi chachmei, which is the highest level of chachma, wisdom, which is one with Hashem, like you said before. Now, how does this work? How does it work? On the one hand, every single neshama has the same source, Hashem himself, godly DNA. But at the same time, it's different levels.
I just started with Rabbi. He wasn't good till I think someone asked him he asked him married sister in the church married to the Torah.
Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yechanan, yeah.
But he didn't have a good neshama, so how did he?
We're going to see soon that you can elevate. We're going to see soon about that. But right now, the fact remains, on the one hand, there's different levels of neshamas. And at the other hand, we're saying that every single neshama comes from the same place, from Hashem himself. So how does this work? So now comes the issue of the mother. Let's see. Ukamashal, this is like an example. Haben, a son. Ha-nimshech mimayach ha'av, which comes from the deepest place in the father, from the father's mind. Right? The DNA of the father goes into the child. Now, let me ask you a question. Does your toenail have less DNA of your father than your brain? No. But in the level of the body, of course the brain is higher than the nail. So here you see in the body, you have one body, thousands of levels, literally thousands of levels in your body. But at their root and core, one DNA. And that's how neshamas are. Every neshama in the world, every Jewish soul that ever lived and ever will live is like one big body. And when you have a big body, you have different parts of the body. There's the eyes, there's the brain, there's the heart, there's the toenails, there's the elbows. And therefore, every Jew is like a different part of this big spiritual body. But at the core, every Jew, no matter what level he is, has the same DNA. And that's what a mother does. The father gives essential DNA, but then when the mother develops it in pregnancy, you start to develop, from this one DNA, you start to develop an arm, a leg, toenails, eyes, brain, nose, ears, all different levels. So you can have different levels, but they're the same core.
Why to be Jewish, you have to have
What?
Is that connected? Why?
It's a separate thing. This we're just using this as an example. We're using this as an example. In the same way, every part of my son is an extension of me. And at the same time, every part of my son is different in terms of their level. There's the brain of the son, my son, there's my son's eyes, my son's toenails. So they're all equally, essentially my DNA, but on different levels. Same thing is true of the Jewish people. Every Jew is a different level, but at the core, one DNA. Clear? So let's see it in Alter Rebbe. Even the toenails of the son, Nizhavu, was created mitipa zumamish, from the same one DNA seed of the father. How did it develop into a toenail? By spending 9 months in the mother's stomach, mother's womb. The yardam madrega madrega, and the seed this DNA changed from one level to another. Lishtana is to change, ulisavis, and to create memena from its aparnim nails. Ve'im kolzeh, even though it became a nail now, it still remains one and connected. With an absolutely beautiful and one unity. In its original first state of being, which is what? The Father's DNA. Which is the seed that comes from the Father. Clear? So even as a Jew misbehaves in the most terrible way, and he turns himself into the grossest toenail, he's still absolutely connected to Hashem. Because that's his essence, that's his DNA. Now when you understand what we mean when we say that the neshama of a Jew is indestructible. No matter, your famous Gemara, Yisrael, a Jew, afal pi shechata, even though he sins, Yisrael, who is still a Jew. Right? Because you can't change your DNA. To give an example. Even if you cut the nail off of the toe, it's no longer connected to the body. But does it still have the Father's DNA? Absolutely. A Jew can do the worst things possible. Chas v'shalom. Does that change his essential DNA that he's connected to where he came from? The essence of Hashem himself, the godly DNA? Absolutely doesn't change. A Jew is a Jew, is a Jew, is a Jew. You ever heard that line? A Jew is a Jew, is a Jew, is a Jew. You ever heard that expression? This is where it comes from. From this line here, from this Tanya, from this chapter. No matter what he does, it doesn't matter. He's got godly divine DNA. He's got a godly soul, literally a part of Hashem in him. He has Hashem's DNA in him, spiritual DNA. It doesn't matter what you do, you cannot get rid of that. And that's why a Jew can always do teshuvah. And that's why, think about this. I tell this when I teach boys by mitzvah lessons. Think about this. In order to make a minyan, how many people do you need? You need 10 Jewish men. Okay. Who's holier? 9 Moshe Rabbeinus? Or 10 people like me and you? Moshe Rabbeinu is much greater, much smarter. Even one Moshe Rabbeinu is better than 10 of us. But during prayer, it doesn't work. He can be as holy as he wants, but he cannot make a minyan. No Kaddish, no Torah reading. But 9 people like me and you, 10 people like me and you, who maybe, yes, maybe no, did some averos, right? We did some sins maybe. Not us, but other people. Right? We could make a minyan. How does that work? Because it doesn't matter what you did or didn't do. You have godly soul in you, you count for one. You're a Jew. Just like Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu is not more Jewish than you. Maybe Moshe Rabbeinu is acting more Jewish. Maybe he's a higher level of Jewish soul. But he's not more Jewish. Now you understand the Chabad attitude of even someone who is not Shomer Shabbat comes to shul and he's welcomed. Other communities are not like that. Other communities, they say, look, you're misbehaving. You're not acting like a Jew. Get out. Right? The Chabad says no. What do you mean? He's got a godly soul. Doesn't matter what he did. Deep down, he has a neshama. He has a godly DNA. You can't ruin that. You can't get rid of that. He's still a Jew. Question's what he's doing.
I've been to a synagogue before. The old one I used to go to. There's people who come in with their cell phones in the middle, not outside, inside the shul. They would use their cell phones, have them dressed with skirts up to their.
Right. Look, it's not respectful, but even in such an Chabad, maybe we'll go to them respectfully and say, please put your phone away. Right? But chas v'shalom, we don't tell someone to leave shul because he's a Jew. Is a Jew is a Jew. I know this is the Chabad attitude. I'm telling you, but it comes from here. I know other Jews have other attitudes, but this is our attitude.
The question is to you: if somebody was downstairs during a Shabbat, prayer started using his cell phone.
They're disturbing others. It's one thing, but it's happened where people have taken their cell phones out, and I've seen it also. But we don't tell someone to leave because a Jew is a Jew. Right? When you do a mitzvah, you become Jewish? No. You already are Jewish. When you do a mitzvah, you start to live a little more Jewishly. You start to act more Jewishly. But you're Jewish already. That's what this chapter is saying. Doesn't matter what kind of Jew you are, whether you're the toenail Jew or you're the brains Jew like Moshe Rabbeinu. You're still a Jew. You still have the DNA of Hashem. Just like my child, his toenail and his brains are the same DNA to me. And the same one connection with me, who they really are, a Jew. Clear? Okay. Now I'm going to add another part. Since we're comparing all the Jewish people to one big body, and every soul is a different part of this body, right? A spiritual body, right? So the tzaddikim are like what? What part of the body would the tzaddik be? The brains. Me and you, or the head, the heart, right? That's the Jew. Me and you, whatever, toenail, leg, arm, elbow, something else. Let me ask you, how does an elbow stay alive? It has to be connected to the brain and the heart. Now you understand why a Jew has to be connected to the tzaddik. In the same way for every single part of the body, to live as it's supposed to be, with its DNA, godly DNA, in order for my toenail to grow, it's got to be connected to the body and connected to the brain and the heart. So too, every Jew who wants to live a proper, good Jewish life and really live his godly DNA and really live out his Jewishness, he has to be connected to the tzaddik. And that's the job of a Rebbe. That's why in Chassidut, a Rebbe is so important. A Rebbe is not just someone who teaches you more Torah. A Rebbe is someone you connect to so that you can live better as a Jew. Just like a finger, in order for it to live better as a finger, it needs to be connected to the brain and the heart. But at the same time, the finger itself has its own Jewish DNA. Following? So let's see it in Alter Rebbe. The gaman, even now, achshav beben, now that the child is born, the way the finger, the toenail, stays alive, comes from the brain by staying connected to the mind. The Gemara says Nida, over there talks about how the child is developed. And skip the parentheses. So too, so to speak, the source, the root, the essence, the DNA of every single Jew, when it comes from God's, right, the soul comes from God himself, from God's mind. But till it gets to your body, it's got to go down a bunch of levels. Till it comes to your body. From Hashem's wisdom, this high lofty level where the Jew comes from, like it says that everything comes from wisdom. It's the highest level. And that's how we get to lower levels of souls. Just like the seed has to go to the mother to develop and become a toenail, so too, the neshama comes from the loftiest place of Hashem, but when it comes down into the body, it can go through all kinds of levels, to the point that we have neshamas for a very low level Jew. But in Koza, even if he's a low level Jew, he's still connected, one, with an amazing oneness. In his true first state of being, which is godliness itself. So even as a Jew does the worst things, even if he goes to the lowest levels, he still remains a Jew connected to Hashem in his deepest part of his heart. That's his neshama, the indestructible part of a Jewish neshama. Clear? And then, and the way in which the neshama of the simple Jew is going to get life is by connecting to the tzaddik, the chachamim and the chachamim, Rosh b'nei Yisrael, which is the heads of the Jewish people. In the same way, my finger, in order for it to be alive, in order for it to live out its DNA that it got from my father, it needs to be connected to my mind. So too, in order for you to live out the godly DNA, the godly neshama you were given, who do you have to connect to? Through who? Through the tzaddik. The tzaddik helps you connect to your truth as a Jew with godliness in it. So in order for you to live out your godliness, connected to the tzaddik, connected to the Rebbe. Clear? Okay. Now we understand, on top of the next page, Maimar Azal, that which the Chachamim say. Ala Pasuk, the Pasuk says, Ledofka boy. The Pasuk says you have to connect to Hashem. So the Chachamim say, how do you connect to Hashem? The Chachamim say a few things. And one of the things they say is, Shekola Tavak B'dam Chacham, anybody who's connected to the Tzaddikim, to the Tamid Chachamim, Ma'ala Ala Vakasov, the Pasuk considers it, Hashem considers it, Ki'ilu Nidbet B'Shchina Mamish, it's as if connected to Hashem literally. How does connecting to the Tzaddik help you connect to Hashem? But based on what we just explained, what is it like? In the same way, my finger wants to stay alive. What does it have to be connected to? To the brain. And if it's connected to the brain, it's not as if my finger lives the brain's life. My finger lives its own life, but it lives its own life by being connected to the brain. So you as a Jew, how do you live your own life as a Jew connected to Hashem? By being connected to the brain, by being connected to the tzaddik. The tzaddik helps you live your own life as a Jew. Following? Like a finger, that if it wants to live a good finger, it's got to be connected to the brain and the heart. So a Jew wants to live the godly DNA, the godly neshama that Hashem gave him, he has to be connected to the tzaddikim. Okay? By when the Jew connects to a tzaddik, to the Talmidei Chachamim, he connects his own nefesh and his own neshama, even if he's a simple Jew, and that helps him connect to who he really is. And what's he really? A godly neshama, which came from God's highest level, where Hashem and his wisdom are one, and therefore comes from Hashem himself. Clear? Okay. Now the rest of the chapter, I'm just going to tell you outside. I'm just going to explain to you what it says, and God willing, we're running low on time. And tomorrow we're going to go to chapter 3. So the end of chapter 2, he says like this. Even though it's true that the essence of your neshama comes from Hashem, right? You're like the child that comes from the father's DNA. And no matter what level of neshama you are, you still have Hashem's divine energy invested in you, no matter what level it is. And then, depending on how your neshama came down from heaven into your body, it changes. Either you're a head, like a tzaddik, or you're a elbow or a toenail, whatever it is, right? But nonetheless, the way parents behave also has an effect on the neshama. When parents get married, and they live together the way Jews are supposed to live together, it helps the neshama have a better way of living in the world. That's right. That's right. So what it means like this. Your personality is similar to what? To your parents. Which means the neshama Hashem gives you is going to live in this world based on the personality your parents give you. Right? So it's possible sometimes that Hashem puts a very, very high neshama born to parents of complete rishayim. And because the parents are rishayim, the child has a very hard time expressing his neshama. But if he digs deep down, could he make his neshama come out? Absolutely. Which teaches you two things. On the one hand, parents have a very big influence on the way their children are. On the other hand, you have free choice to go above and beyond any limits your parents may have put on you. Baruch Hashem, no one here has to worry about that. Our parents are wonderful, and they gave us wonderful personalities and wonderful ways of interacting with the world. But it's important to know this anyway. So to recap chapter 2, summary. We learned really 3 things. Number 1, we learned that the neshama is not created by Hashem. It's a part of Hashem. Like blowing versus speaking. It's a part of Hashem himself. And like a father, that my child is a part of me, an extension of me, not something I made. It's the first thing we learned. The second thing we learned is, even though that's true, at the same time, there are levels. Just like a body has levels in the body, finger, brain, eyes, and even though there's all these different levels, they still have the same DNA, they still came from the same father, right? And even if we're talking about a toenail, it's still connected to what it really is, which is a child of the Father. So likewise, a Jew, even if he descends to the lowest level, still at his core, what is he? A Jew, which is a part of Hashem, even if he goes to the lowest level. Like a fingernail or a toenail, that's still connected to being part of the Father's DNA. That's the second thing we learned. The third thing we learned is, just like a body, in order for the body to be alive, in order for the finger to live the life that the Father gave it, it has to be connected to what? To the brain. So too, for a Jew to live out his Jewishness, his godly neshama, he has to be connected to the brain of the Jewish people. Who is the brain of the Jewish people? Tzaddikim. And that's how he can really truly connect to Hashem. Those are the 3 things we learned about the neshama. And this basically is, in one word, the DNA of the neshama. It's godly DNA. God willing, tomorrow when we get chapter 3, we're going to talk about the godly soul's mind and the godly soul's heart. Chapter 4, we're going to get to the godly souls mitzvahs, and chapter 5, we're going to get to the godly souls Torah study. Chapter 2 today.
So it's one chapter every day.
Yeah, hopefully one chapter every day. 53. No, there's more parts. There's 5 parts to Tanya. Part 1 has 53 chapters. Part 2, 12. Part 3, 12. And then later stuff longer.
All of this is Tanya, right?
Yeah, but in the back, you have indexes and you have other things.
Yeah, I thought it was
No, there's 5 parts to Tanya. And part 1 is 53 chapters. That's what we're learning now.
I thought.
Chapter 7.
Yeah, so that's already part 2 of Tanya there you're looking at. Right?
So
Well, hopefully we'll finish the
part 1.
part 1 by the end of the summer. I don't know if we have 53 days. Sorry?
We're talking about the Neshama?
The whole thing?
No, like in this part, it's on Neshama.
Part 1 talks about the godly soul, the animal soul, and the struggle. So it's going to give us inspiration. How do we make the godly soul win? But first we're learning what the godly soul is.
What about next chapter?
In part 2,
Yeah.
part 2 talks about how Hashem creates the world. Part 3 talks about Teshuvah. Part 4 is a bunch of letters that the Alter Rebbe, the one who wrote the Tanya, wrote. And those letters talk about different subjects: prayer, study, tzedakah. No, the letters is called the Geret HaKodesh. And this is the Geret HaTeshuvah. That's part 3, which is Teshuvah, Geret HaKodesh. These are letters. And it talks about charity, prayer. And then the end, part 5, is called Kuntres Acharon, which is basically like an appendix explaining Kabbalistic ideas. So hopefully we'll get through at least the big part of part 1. I don't know if we'll get all the way to chapter 53, because I don't know if we have 53 days. But we'll get through a big part of part 1, and we're going to learn for sure how the godly soul works, how the animal soul works, how to fight the animal soul, and how to inspire the godly soul to serve Hashem better. That we're for sure going to get through, God willing. Okay?